Hello, Endeavour. You would join me on Tuesday for chapter 26 of The Fire Thief, where we learnt last night that Uncle Edward isn't dead. Let's see what happens next. The storm in the night before the execution. A terrible thing has happened. As I write this record, I somehow shuffled the papers and this chapter got out of order. Oh dear. Well, let's go back a little way to the trial. We were in the courtroom. Uncle Edward was sentenced to hang and I cried out, "No, please, no, remember." After the trial, this happened. It will help to explain some of the last chapter. Sorry about that. I hope it doesn't spoil your enjoyment, and I'll try not to do it again. They tell me I fainted. They say Theus picked me up and carried me back to the Storm Inn. All I know is that I woke up on the stage. My head was resting on the magic lantern that was covered in the white cloth. Theus had placed his wings over me to keep me warm. I opened my eyes. The room was not how we'd left it. There was hardly a table or a chair that hadn't been smashed or splintered. The English gentleman, Theus and January, sat on the coffin in a row, like three gloomy crows on a rooftop. It was an almost empty coffin now. The police had emptied it of the loot and left Skinny the skeleton chipped, cracked and pathetic. January didn't look like her sharp-faced, ugly self any longer. Her eyes were red with crying and her nose was red from snivelling. "Are you all right, Jim?" she asked. "No," I said. "Uncle Edward will die and I'll be thrown out of Eden City. I've nowhere to go. If they try to send me back to the orphanage, I'll run away." "You'll starve," the English gentleman said. "I don't care," I said, and I think I sounded as bleak as the foghorn on the river outside. "I wish I could hang alongside Uncle Edward. At least it'd be a quick end." "No," Theus said, "it was my fault. If I hadn't gone looking for the Temple of the Hero, I wouldn't have told the sergeant where to find us. We'd have been on that train and 100 miles away from here." I sighed. "Uncle Edward gave his life to save mine." I said, "I always thought he never cared. I never thought he could be so..." "Noble," the English gentleman said, giving me one of his fine writer's words. "Noble," I agreed and sat up. "A hero," January said. "A what?" Theus asked suddenly. "A hero," she repeated. "Then I have to save him," Theus said. "I have to show him to Zeus." "Who?" the English gentleman asked. "My cousin," Theus said. "He's told me most of the story, but didn't want to waste his time telling the other two." "You can't save him," January argued. "No one ever escapes the jailhouse of Eden City." Theus rose from the coffin. "It's my fault," he repeated. "I should be hanging instead of him." "Then you'd be dead," January argued. "What good would that do?" "But what about if I lived?" Theus asked. I knew what he meant, but the English gentleman shook his head. "Impossible." "No, it's not," January said, jumping to her feet. "I've heard about this before. There is a way to cheat the rope." We looked at her as she jumped up onto the coffin. She mimed putting the rope around her neck. "The rope pulls your throat closed and chokes you," she said. "But I've heard that some victims put a strong metal tube down their throat. It saves them. Their friends take their body for burial, pull out the tube and wake them up." "Yes," the English gentleman cried. "An English highwayman did that 100 years ago, I think. It worked for him." "So all we have to do is smuggle a piece of pipe to Mr. Slaughter," January said. I shook my head. "I'll bet that highwayman was a fit young man. Uncle Edward is old and fat. The drop would kill him." Theus nodded. "That's why we need a young man to take his place." "I can't do it," I sighed. "I'd like to, but it wouldn't work." "That's why I have to be the one," Theus said eagerly. January Storm shook her head. "Sorry, but I don't see how you can take the place of a fat old man." "I do," Theus cried. "Remember in Mucklethrift Manor, Uncle Edward said I need to make myself look like a ghastly fat old man, and I told him he was a ghastly fat old man, but he put that paint on his face." "Grease paint," I said. "Yes, and the powder in his hair." "Well, I could do that," Theus said. "You can't just jump on the scaffold, knock Mr. Slaughter out the way and take his place," January argued. "Ha!" the Englishman cried. "I have the answer. It's like the plot from a book. We dress Theus as Mr. Slaughter, then we go and visit him in jail. We tell the guards that Theus is your uncle's twin brother." I nodded. "When we get into the cell, we leave Theus behind to hang with the pipe down his throat, and we walk out with the real Uncle Edward." "Perfect," the English gentleman said, "and it will make a perfect ending to the story that I am writing this month. It's called A Tale of Two Towns." Theus will have to give a speech on the scaffold, January said. They always do that. What do I say? Theus asked, worried. Oh, I'll write you something, English gentleman offered. It's my job. Get dressed in Uncle Edward's spare clothes, I said to Theus, and pointed to my uncle's bag at the side of the stage. My faintness was gone now, and the blood was bubbling in my brain. Uncle Edward had saved me from the orphanage, and now I could repay him and save him from the scaffold. Oddly, it never entered my mind that Uncle Edward had saved me from one horror, the orphanage, only to throw me into a worse horror of hanging. I never blamed him for that. All I wanted to do was save him. The make-up box was safe beneath Skinny's crumbling skull. In just 10 minutes, I had made Theus look like Uncle Edward. At least he could pass for him in the faint candlelight of the jailhouse and in the foggy morning light. Uncle Edward had been wearing his black coat. His spare was dark green. They're not the same, January groaned. The guard'll spot it. No, the gentleman writer said, grinning. It makes it better. We switch coats inside the cell. A green coat walks in and a green coat walks out. The guard won't be looking at the face, just the coat. Of course, January agreed. I'm a fool. For just a moment, a flash of the old sarcasm sparked in me. Yep, she went to a mind reader, but he gave her her money back, I quipped. She turned on me. Get back to the country. Some village is missing an idiot. If you were twice as smart, you'd be a half-wit. If your brains were gunpowder, you wouldn't have enough to blow your hat off. There's no time for this, the gentleman writer cried, stepping between us. January, go and find us a piece of pipe that Theus can use. She ran off into the kitchen. The English gentleman shook his head. This is the bravest thing I've ever seen, he said. Theus shrugged. It's nothing, he said, and he caught my eye. We both knew that Theus would live on after they'd hanged him, and then I remembered something. While the gentleman writer went to find some paper to write on Theus's scaffold speech, I whispered, Theus, you'll be using godly powers. I know. There'll be a green spark and the Avenger will track you down. Yeah, and this time you'll be destroyed forever, ground to dust. He nodded. That's why you have to get me back in the coffin, bring me back to the inn, and have my wings waiting for me. With any luck, I'll be away before the Fury tracks me down. And without luck? He left the question hanging in the air, like a man on the end of a rope. Join me tomorrow, guys, for chapters 27 and 28. We're nearly there. See you soon.